Today we're going to be working on a 2011 Jeep Grand Cherokee Overland, and we are going to be replacing a failing throttle body. In order to get to the throttle body, we're going to have to take off the plastic cover that is largely just for looks, the air intake box, and where the air intake connects to the throttle body itself. Okay, with the top cover off, we can see the throttle body, the connector for the throttle body, and where it connects to the air intake box, as well as the sensor connector that goes into the air intake box. And we're going to have to unplug these guys and disconnect the intake. There are 4 screws holding this guy on. Should be fairly simple. One of the joys of working outside is you get to hear things like your neighbor firing up a lawnmower. So for the rest of this video, the only audio you'll hear is the soothing sound of my monotone voice. So the first thing we'll need to do is loosen up the connector to the air intake lid. We don't have to take the entire air box out, just the lid that connects to this tube. In fact, we could probably leave it connected to the tube. It's just easier if you're not trying to manage this 4-foot long monstrosity of connected things. Next up is this longer section of the air intake. There is a single bolt that holds it in place, apart from just its general shape, as well as a ring clamp that connects it directly to the throttle body. So we just need to take out that one bolt, loosen up the ring clamp, and we should be able to just pull it out after that. So it occurred to me a bit late, you may be asking yourself, why are you replacing this throttle body? Well, there's nothing wrong with the physical throttle body itself, but attached to the side, that black portion attached to the machined metal, is a sensor. Actually, a couple of sensors, TP1, TP2. Throttles no longer have cables in modern cars. They're controlled by the computer. And these two sensors need to agree with one another, otherwise the computer throws an error. And if it gets bad enough, it will knock you down into a mode where all you can do is idle and pull over to the side of the road. So you're not completely stranded, but you're not really mobile, and we don't want to get to that point. When this error code is thrown, in addition to an OBD2 engine warning light, in Chrysler products, you'll also get the dreaded red lightning bolt, which is a lot scarier than it probably should be. Unfortunately, we can't just replace the sensor because it is not something you can remove. It is built right into the housing, and you get to replace the entire throttle body, which makes sense, right? I mean, if you change a doorknob, you replace the whole door in your house, right? So, of the various options for the replacement, I went with Standard Motor Products. I have no particular loyalty to any given brand. The original Mopar part was about $200. There are what they call economy parts, which is a nice way of saying I wouldn't drive across the country after you put this on. The Standard Motor Products part was about $149 at Rock Auto. I think it was about $135 on Amazon. And it was, in terms of quality, on par with the factory original part. As you can see, it comes with a new O-ring gasket. We're going to use that. The old one might be fine, but there's no reason not to replace it if they've included one. You definitely don't want to have a leak where there's a gasket. Engines are basically a large vacuum, and if it sucks additional air in past the air sensor, you'll end up with a lean condition, which is the same kind of thing that can happen if you have old vacuum lines with cracks in them. The engine ends up sucking in air that gets past the mass airflow sensor, so the computer doesn't accurately know how much airflow is coming into the system. Okay, so this is our old, possibly original throttle body. It looks remarkably clean, so I'm guessing that the dealership I bought it from either cleaned it or this has been replaced at some point. I really expected it to just be black. I'm going to have to remove this sensor connector and then the 4 bolts that are holding it onto the intake plenum. So yeah, this looks suspiciously clean. I don't understand why it's so clean, but it is an original Mopar part, made in Germany. Thanks, Daimler. Alright, so the first thing I need to do now is remove the old O-ring. And I have this set of dental picks I picked up at a swap meet years ago. They're really handy for getting in and grabbing little things in tiny slots. And there it is. It's kind of dirty, but it's not broken, cracked, looks fairly new. And because I'm a bit neurotic, I'm going to take the time to make sure that none of these openings, seal areas, anything, have any dust, dirt, debris, anything that might get sucked into the engine. So there is nothing that you can pull into your intake that is good for your engine. One thing you're going to want to be careful about if you have the same 5.7 Hemi that I'm working on is the intake plenum is plastic, and these screws thread directly into the plastic. You do not want to over torque them, because if you crack that, then you need to get a new intake plenum, and then you've got another job and another cost and crying and all that. All right, so we're almost ready to put this thing back together. First thing we need to do there is put the new gasket on. And the gasket has a little notch sticking out of it, which fits into a notch in the intake plenum, and that aligns the gasket. I don't know why. It's a perfectly symmetrical circle, but there it is. There's a notch, and you're going to have a hard time getting it in there if that doesn't line up. Once that's good, we can basically do the reverse process of what we did, taking everything apart. Put our screws back in, reattach our sensor connectors, and reassemble the air intake box. And before we fire this up for the first time, just do a double check, make sure you've reconnected all your hoses, make sure you've reconnected your sensor connectors, all your bolts and screws, you don't have any leftover parts. After that, the next thing to do is to fire this baby up and let it relearn itself. This, in theory, can take up to 2 minutes, but in my case, it just ran fine immediately. No new error codes, with the exception of my existing tire inflation system error code. One of the sensors is no longer reporting air pressure, so every time I get in, it complains about it. And apparently, I also need gas. But apart from those minor ailments, everything's back together, runs good, life is good, and I believe I've earned myself a beer. The only thing left to do is put the cosmetic cover back over the engine. This has 4 little balls that snap into 4 little holes, and it's kind of hard to tell if they've snapped in or not. And if you don't get it and you drive around, it will bounce around in here and end up sideways. So that's nice. So, until next time, keep your eyeballs covered and your fingers attached.